Welcome to episode 48 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm interviewing Angus Sampson. Angus is an actor, writer, director who just completed an independent film called The Mule. We get into some real detail about how this film came together, and we talk about how he was able to parlay a successful acting career into a writing and directing career. So much of what he talks about can be used by anyone to improve their career, even if you're not an actor, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast, so they are very much appreciated. Over on YouTube, thank you to Brian King. He left me a nice comment on episode 43. He left a comment about the podcast. He left a comment about my commentary at the end of the podcast. And these sorts of comments are actually very helpful to me just to get a sense of what people like and don't like. So thank you very much, Brian, for that. Thank you to Stanford Crane, who left me a nice comment on episode 46. I'm actually close to having 500 subscribers to my YouTube channel. So if you use YouTube a lot, consider subscribing to the channel, and it should help me push past that 500 mark. Thank you guys for that. Quite a few retweets last week. I really do appreciate all of those. Thank you, Nara Ryder, Ink Moves, Marty Wolf, Film Fanatic, and Lucy Hay for retweeting episodes last week. I'm sure I'm missing a few people who did retweets, and I apologize. It's just really difficult to figure out exactly who retweeted what. These are very much appreciated. And on Facebook, thank you, Max Orcus, Lou Agens, Christian Moore, Jay Blair Brown, Mary Avila, and Virginia Shine. They all liked some of the recent episodes, so thank you guys for those likes on Facebook. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 48. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. Just a quick few words about what I'm working on. This is sort of a slow time of the year. Things in Hollywood seem to really slow down after the holidays, or I should say before the holidays until after the holidays. So there's really not a lot going on for me right now. I did hear from the producer who has my baseball comedy optioned. He's going to re-option the script for another 6 months. He has to pay a few bucks for this, so it's a good sign that he is serious. He's a super nice guy, so I really hope we can get this project going. I think he'll do a good job with it, but of course we'll see. Today I'm talking with actor, writer, director Angus Sampson. Here is the interview. Welcome, Angus, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks for having us on.
So to start out, I wonder if you can just give us a quick overview of your career, kind of how you got into the entertainment industry and eventually got to directing and writing The Mule.
Well, I started out, when I left school, I was pursuing, in inverted commas, a career in rugby union. And I guess pursuing is probably not an apt description, and nor is career. I had spent most of my life avoiding responsibility, and I started doing some improv and what have you in Australia, which then led to being asked to be on a music program in which I was a mute, and I wore a balaclava. But it was a live music program for 3 hours on a Saturday morning, and I got exposed to all manner of things in front of camera without actually having to expose myself. I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to show my face. I felt it was like an incredible sort of tour of the machinations of live television. And on that show, I met a gentleman by the name of Lee Winnell, who was also another teenager who had been given a job on this, I guess, youth, live youth music program, which featured film reviews, which featured bands performing, which featured interviews with people from Jose Ramos Horta from the East Timorese government through to James Leonard or James. We ended up meeting and chatting with all these different people that I guess from all walks of life. That really it was a fantastic. It was almost like doing work experience. And Lee and I befriended one another. As we did most of the presenters on the show, and we ended up living together, and I guess Lee's sort of curiosity around feature films came around him missing out on a role in an Alex Proyas film called Garage Days, and so he thought, you know what, I'm actually going to write myself a role. I'm sick of missing out on films, and that for me was around the time that I started writing for television in Australia. And I guess he kind of inspired and showed me that, well, not kind of, but was absolutely able to say that, a career in writing and the arts is absolutely possible. I certainly don't have the focus to do any long form like tomes or anything, but from, I guess, pursuing a career in the arts, I've been lucky enough to work with such screenwriters in the performing capacity, as Dave Eggers on Where the Wild Things Are, and Spike Jonze, and Dr. George Miller for the new Mad Max, and most recently with Lee Winnell himself on a feature film that we've written called The Mule. And curiously, I'd never written a feature film before, and Lee had never ever collaborated with somebody before on the level that we wrote together. Yes, he had created a film titled Saw, and Insidious with our friend James Wan, the director James Wan, and whilst they have writing credits together on that, Lee was actually on the sort of doing the predominant writing, whereas on The Mule we would sort of write scenes for one another, or go off and write certain character arcs, and but certainly working with him was the greatest lesson I'd ever had, where I'd be spending hours rewriting one scene. He would have written 6 or 7 scenes to my half. So I guess I found myself actually, being drawn to this area of after having acted in a lot of feature films and television in Australia and abroad, then starting to direct commercials, and having written for television, I thought, well, what else is the most attractive thing to me? And that was meeting and hearing and listening to these wonderful screenwriters who ultimately, I guess, a god to the directors, Jesus.
Yeah. Let's go. Let me take just back up a little bit. You mentioned you started acting on this kid show, and then at some point you transitioned to TV. Take me through that, to writing television.
Yeah.
Take me through that transition, because I know there's definitely a lot of people who want to break into TV writing. How did you make that transition? What was that like? How did you kind of get that break as a TV writer?
Yeah. Well, the way I got my first ever gig writing television was actually off the back of performing. So I guess that was, I guess that's what maybe that's what they do on Saturday Night Live, or that you sort of you're a writer performer. I certainly wasn't hired to write the television show that I ended up first writing on. I was actually hired as an actor on the show, and they have writing rooms, and you're in there receiving your scripts and ideas and what have you. And I guess it was a safe enough environment to be able to proffer up alternatives, both there and then on the day, and also ideas, in the plotting room and what have you. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to have a lady who the show was written around by the name of Mary Custis, who was very generously invested in me, I guess, professionally and personally, and encouraged me to pick up the pen and to write more, and to actually say, no. Well, Angus is going to write for his character, just as I guess Ian Brennan might co-creator of Glee might write for one specific character on that. It started out. That's how it started out for me. Mm-hmm. Yes, I had experience writing sketches and skits on television, on the kids' kind of music show. But as far as sort of doing something adult, that was it came off the back of me being a performer.
Mm-hmm. And what, just describe this show. You were a series regular on this show, and so then you would just come up with. It started with just like a joke here, a joke there, and after time you were able to.
Did you ever see that show? I'm pretty certain they did it in America. It was a British program originally called The Kumars at Number 42, and the premise of it was an Indian family in a fictitious, in a suburb in London or South London, and the guests would come to their house, and they'd meet them in their kitchen, and rather than sort of have the traditional chat show where the host would be at a desk and the guest sits on the couch, this, in theory, you'd have Richard E. Grant would in theory, just drop into the Kumar's house at number 42, and the family would sit on the couch instead of him and ask him, leading questions. Which there was the character, there was a father, there was a mother, in theory the kind of host, the elderly son who was still living at home, who should have been out of home by that stage, and the wisecracking grandmother, who said very inappropriate, almost, I guess, generationally racist things to the guests. And in theory, you could almost guess what the characters the guests were going to say. So the way that show worked was the company I worked for, one of the major free-to-air networks in Australia, Network 7, they licensed and optioned the franchise, I guess, of that show. And so in Australia, the largest population of Greeks outside of Athens, and this includes the second largest city in Greece, Thessaloniki, the second largest population of Greeks in the world is Melbourne in Australia. And so they take this, I guess, for want of a better description, ethnic minority, there's the Indians in London, the Greeks in Melbourne, and this show was called Greeks on the Roof. And in theory, we lived in a housing commission flat. There was myself, my mother, the host, who was my cousin, and her parents. And so the guests would come and visit our housing commission apartment, and we would do the show on the roof. And so you would we had people on the show like Jerry Springer or Heidi Fleiss, and you would get their biographies, you would get their I guess what they were in the country for, what they were touring for. You'd have an opportunity to speak with their manager or even them in the lead up to the recording. Say it was on a Friday night, you get to have a chat with them on Tuesday, and you do it as yourself, as Ashley or as Angus, and you'd say, oh, it says here in your biography that you know how to do an Irish tap dance, or where did you learn that? And you could almost you'd read your bio and you'd get ideas as to how that may inform your character. I played a fairly dim-witted cousin who was unemployed, but it was always on the make around the Housing Commission flats. And so, anything that their biography, Jerry Springer talks about, how he got into trouble for, visiting call girls by paying with checks that bounced, and you're like, oh, right, well, what scenario would my character have done that in, or would he recognise or relate to Jerry over? And you could act, whilst it wasn't scripted for our guests, you could almost anticipate or almost, cajole them into a little, or coerce them into a little area where you kind of knew what their answer was going to be. And so we had to write setup questions. We had to write, character, reinforcing character of the four people sitting on the couch, almost like reading over the host's shoulder. If you were trying to read a book at a cafe and someone's, reading the book over your shoulder. That was kind of the premise, is that this lady was trying to interview the guests. She played a character named Effie, and her family wouldn't let her do it, in peace, and they kept butting in theory. So it came about that I met a gentleman on that show, a very good Australian writer by the name of Chris Merkshaw, and Chris introduced me to a writing colleague of his by the name of Jamie Brown, and we found that it was quite an interesting writing room, because we were meant to be writing from the perspective of first-generation Australians, but no one in the writing room was that. They're all very Anglican and second or third generation Australians. So there was a sort of a shift in the writing room as it went as the series evolved, and I guess the opportunities were there for the diligent writer amongst us, and what ended up happening was that we ended up almost writing longer hours, dare I say, spending more time, crafting arcs and spending more time on it rather than just sort of proffering up kind of witty one-liners. That was certainly something that I always tried to do, was to focus on the character of the characters rather than the double entendres or rather than trying to say something of a joke. I always felt that was a lot easier to write and felt a lot more honest and familiar for the audience. So so that's what ended up happening, actually. Yeah, we ended up, but basically it ended up just putting my hand up and by, I guess, via the bosses, they kept putting my lines and my scenarios and my pieces in. They'd almost like be little chapters kind of things where you could write 4 or 5 responses based on what the guest would say, and then we'd film it live in front of an audience. So it had a great sense of risk there.
Yeah. I can see how that would be very fertile ground for actors like yourself who are willing to do the work and actually write stuff, how it would be very receptive. Let's move on to, I read a quick blurb about your bio, that you started to direct commercials. And I think maybe you can tell us, so you've done some acting, and I think that's a great story, how you transitioned from acting to writing. Maybe you can tell us how you transitioned into directing, and I think that will set us up perfectly for then talking about the Mule in detail. So how did you go from then being an actor and now a writer to also directing?
Well, I think actually, I think any one of us who has put their hand up to act in something for someone, you get a real sense of just how many forces there are at play in trying to interpret a screenwriter's words and intent. And you know, I don't think you can ever be perfectly in sync, despite having great working relationships. I look at it as a vantage point. You know, unless you're standing in exactly the same spot with exactly the same height, with exactly the same experiences behind you, you're not going to see the same things. And so I think it got to the stage where, you know, I had acted in a lot of things, and I found myself, you know, sort of always doing this kind of uninspiring response, answering in an uninspired way when people would say, "Oh, you know, what do you got coming up next?" And you'd say, "Oh, you'd say Double Trouble or something," and they'd be like, "Oh, right, what's that like?" And you're like, you go, I'm okay, but, you know, it's, yeah. And you never would you ever say, "Oh, I'm terrible in it, but the film's good." You know, that didn't seem to happen. And I guess if you're lucky enough to work with dynamic individuals and diligent individuals who have intellect and taste, and I guess most importantly, you know, that those diligent individuals have a bit of wit, I guess, around solving problems, then you are actually inspired to try your hand at that. You are motivated, if it's a poor experience, to go, you know what, I could do better than this. Surely I could do this. You know, if you're on set enough, you start to see why things are done the way they are, and you start to see where the mistakes are made. And eventually, as an actor, one of the joys of being an actor is you are the aesthetic representation of something. Should it resonate with an audience? Oh, Ashley's front and center, you know, in the Imitation Game. He gets, we see Ashley, but we don't see the writer, or we don't see the gaffer or the best boy. But the flip side of that is when it doesn't resonate with an audience for whatever reason or reasons, you're also the, you know, representative of that as a what people might call a flop or what have you. So, but you very quickly learn, unless you're one of the greats, you very quickly learn how little responsibility ultimately you have beyond offering up some versions of events. Rarely do you sit in an edit suite. Almost never. It's unheard of, unless you're Vince Vaughn and you have the ability to hire and fire the director on someone on Santa Claus 2 or Fred Claus 2. Yeah, but really, you end up being in this position where you watch an edit and you think, oh, right, they used that take, did they? I'm sure there was something else I had done, you know. And ultimately, you realize that you're making contributions to something, and you're responsible as much as a leopard is in a David Attenborough documentary, I feel. you're walking, stalking your prey, looking for a warthog, and they cut in between, various focal lengths and lens sizes on these two animals with a narration, some strings, and timpani drums, and it's edge of the seat stuff. The meerkats are looking around, like to provide the curious bystanders, and it's like, you know what? I'm not even. It could be a meerkat. I could, I mean, Jean-Claude Van Damme in Wrong Bet could be a meerkat, and that would be a good film, that. But you end up realizing, you know what? I actually want to. If you're curious enough, you act on your curiosities, and I think that's what ended up happening. In short, it wasn't like someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You know what, Angus? We've been watching you from the director's booth up there, the corporate box. We'd like to give you the key. You're invited into the bathroom." It wasn't that at all. I had just spent 5 months working as a suit performer on a feature film titled Where the Wild Things Are, with a wonderful collective of storytellers who found themselves as filmmakers. A collective of regular collaborators of the director Spike Jonze, who came from his designer KK Barrett was a drummer in a punk band called the Screamers. His costume designer Casey Storm just was a friend of theirs, and they're like, "Hey, can you help find some costumes, for this Breeders film clip?" That a graffiti artist, Sonny Gerasimowicz, he was a graffiti artist, and they're like, "Yeah, do you want to maybe like draw some concept art for some wild things, like these characters, like 3D versions?" And they would go up to Marie Sendek's house and say, "How about this? And how about that?" And ultimately, they were just trying to tell stories and help each other tell interesting stories. And after spending 5 months near them, around them, meeting people like Dave Eggers and Spike, and being invited to have conversations with Lance Accord and Lance Bangs, two wonderful cinematographers, you end up. I want to taste this. I want to know what it's like to have that responsibility, to be that curious, but you know what? Ultimately, to act on that curiosity, to actually to jump in and say, "No, I'm going to do this. There are people that I've admired and worked with over the years, and I'm going to approach them, and I'm going to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes to contributing to my film." And I ended up.
And now we're segueing into the Mule, correct? Well, about how you got to directing.
No. Curiously, I went through a period actually where I finished this television program as a performer, and I was like, right, what do I do now? And I've never had Social Security benefits, and I was like, I came very close to signing up for some, and I got a job in a bar, and I was like, how can I write? How can I write some things? And I ended up signing up for copywriting school in Australia. It's called a award school, and all you had to do was pay a submission fee, but you had to write a commercial, an example commercial, like here's a sample of my work. And I wrote a commercial, a fictitious one, I guess, with no concept of how long it should be, with no concept of or consideration of budget or corporate branding or positioning. And I wrote an advertisement for the fast food chain McDonald's, and you didn't know that it was a McDonald's commercial, and you certainly wouldn't have guessed it was a McDonald's commercial because the commercial was the Last Supper with Jesus and his 12 disciples. And it was around the time, do you remember that television program, what was the Weakest Link? Do you remember that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Weakest Link. And I think I was like, what am I going to write about? I mean, I want to write an ad. I mean, when someone writes an advertisement, it's like, thanks to Colgate, my teeth have never been whiter. That's an ad. Mm-hmm. So I ended up writing this commercial, or fictitious commercial, on the hope that I would get into this copywriting school. And the commercial I wrote was the Last Supper, and Jesus was chatting to his disciples and saying, one of you betrays me. And they're like, we don't know who. And he's like, well, you need to look inside yourselves. And they're like, well, it's no use. We can't, please just tell us, who is it? And Jesus sort of waved his hands and some music started. And he's like, no, you have to seek inside yourself. There you'll find the answer. And he waves his hand and some music plays, and all the disciples sort of scribble something down in front of them. And then, around this weakest link, and then it would cut to the end of the table after Jesus says, ye have sought, what did you find? And we'd go, and you'd dolly down the table and find the disciples would all vote for Judas, that, they'd like as the weakest link or as the betrayer. And then when it got to Judas, he'd flip over Stephanie, and then Judas. And so the weakest link vote had been cast, and Judas stands up. His robes fall off to reveal himself as the betrayer that he was and is, and turns out to be Colonel Sanders, and exits the Last Supper to go off and start Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so that was the submission, I guess, that I.
And this was just a script, though. You didn't shoot this or direct it. You just submitted the screenplay for this commercial.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful thing to do. It was a wonderful thing to go and do award school and copywriting school. And I tell you why, because you'd go in there every Monday for maybe 8 to 10 weeks. They'd sit down with you and they'd say, okay, this week, here's the brief. It's a billboard. It's an outdoor billboard. And it's an advertisement for Wilshire Stay Sharp knives. And you're like, okay, you're sort of hanging off it's almost like you're on scouts or something, and you're trying to get to the next stage of your, to survive in the bush or what have you, but you're just so hungry and eager to go, yeah, give me some structure, give me some restrictions, give me a brief, let me, it's like that chorus line, let me dance for you. And it's great going to copywriting school because there's so many egos in there who all think that what they're writing and myself included, has never been conceived of before, never been thought of before. And it's a really invigorating place to copywriting school, because they say, no, it has to be short, it has to be sharp, it has to be quick, you have to turn it around, and it has to have a thing called what they call an SMP, a single-minded proposition. And so for Wilshire Stay Sharp knives, for example, one brief that I had was that it needed to be on like an outdoor billboard, which could be anywhere. And the single-minded proposition was, it's a knife that stays sharp. No matter how many times you take it out and put it back in, it's self-sharpening. And so I'm sure it was more articulate than that. And so they would say, okay, you kind of, your time starts now, and they would encourage you on a big sort of B4 size piece of paper or notepad would be to write almost like 64 chess square pieces, not that many, but 48 or whatever, and they just say draw 8 lines down and 8 lines across, and in each of those squares write a different idea. Just keep going until you fill them all. Like if it's terrible, move to the next square. Move to the next square. Keep going. Keep writing on the next one. Go down a row. Go and back to the left. What could it be? What can it be? And you're in there doing this class for maybe 2 or 3 hours, but then you've got a week at home to come back and hand it in. And so what I ended up with that one doing was, like, you go, okay, there's outdoor billboards, right, but how can I be clever? How can I extend that outdoor idea? You're like, what if the billboard was on the side of a bus? And again, you don't care, like, for health and safety regulations. You're just someone trying to show off your ingenuity and imagination. Because of course you're not getting paid. In fact you're paying them to do this. And my brief was, my sort of, what I ended up going with, what I thought was the best option was to have a knife handle, and I guess the bit of the knife going into one of those self-sharpening containers that, I don't know if you know, when you put a sharp knife, you used to be able to slide it into something and it would sharpen it as you. So in theory, when the bus would accelerate, the knife would slide back, and when the bus would brake, it would slide back into the self-sharpening container. And I guess underneath there'd be some copy saying, stay sharp forever, or whatever you wanted to write. And so there was very distinct boundaries. There was very distinct briefs, and there was very distinct structure to it. The biggest challenge for any writer, regardless of their experience, in my experience, is if I was to say to you, Ashley, right now, go, hey, can you write me a story? You can choose whatever you want it to be. And you go, okay. But suddenly it's easier for you if I say, it has to be a story about a spider. And you're like, great, okay. And I say to you, it has to be a story about a spider, and it's got to be 200 words long. Can't be 199, can't be 203. It's got to be 200 words long. And you're like, that's a strange, brief. And outside of that, the first line, the first sentence has to match the last sentence. And all you're doing, I guess, I think is the match that's inside your head, or the gas that's inside your head. You're putting these little matches through and hoping that one of these flames lights and flickers and burns for you to complete those 200 words on a spider, where the sentence is the same at the start and at the end. And that is the greatest. That's the greatest gift, I figure, as a writer, is if you are able to provide that structure yourself, then I think you're much more a successful writer and probably a more productive writer than most who are like, all right, well, I just need to write a page, or I have to write 5,000 words today, but there's no one way to write, and certainly for me, having the exposure to being a copywriter for a while, and for writing sketch stuff for television, and then for longer form television, I found it vastly different experience in each of the areas, and fundamentally, where I ended up just writing my first feature film alongside Lee Winnell and Jamie Brown, I certainly, you saw the 3 levels of experience in our writing team. We had a script that Jamie Brown had written about a gentleman who is coerced into muling drugs from Thailand on an end-of-season football trip, and he is arrested upon his return due to his suspicious behaviour at the airport by the federal police. And they say to him, well, we're obliged to inform you we can't actually x-ray you without your permission. We can't inspect you without your permission. That is your right. And so this drug mule says, well, I don't give you the permission. He's out of his depth, alone and afraid. And then he's informed by his government-appointed attorney that the police are only allowed to detain him without any evidence for 7 days. And so he decides, I'm not going to go to the toilet for 7 days. They'll have nothing on me. They can't prove I've got anything because they can't look inside me. What he doesn't know is that you can't stop your digestive system. It's like your heartbeat. Yeah. And so we were like, what an incredible premise.
Uh-huh.
You have lethal narcotics inside somebody who is under 24/7 observation. When they come out, not if, you'll go straight to jail. You've got someone trying to defy his natural bodily functions in order to stay alive, and in doing so, expose himself to certain death if and when one of the packages perforates. So we optioned this script off Jamie, Lee and I, thinking...
Just to back up for a quick second, where did Jamie find that idea? Was it based on a true story? He saw it in a magazine, newspaper. Where did that sort of idea originate from?
That's the original story for The Mule was suggested to Jamie by a friend of his. He had found a clipping in a newspaper article, and he said, hey, this is a fairly perverse story, and my friend Jamie might like it. And it was on page 24, and it might have been 1-inch column, 12 lines. A man in Iowa has been detained for. The longer he didn't go to the bathroom, the more media coverage he started to get, and his story moved from page 24 to 21, and after 3 days it was 20, and then after 5 days, the guy didn't end up going to the toilet. In theory, he would re-ingest them somehow for 22 days.
Oh my God.
He'd wake up and they'd have slipped out, and he'd push them back in. And so he'd get to like this. Okay, I've got 1 day to go, and then the magistrate would, clearly the circumstantial evidence, however circumstantial, is pretty strong. When you're going, well, the guy won't go to the toilet, so they would keep extending his detention, and it was a futile attempt. But that was a fairly you tell anybody that premise, and given that every man, woman, child, and animal goes to the bathroom, or should I say, moves their bowel. I don't know that too many animals go to a bathroom, but has experiences bowel movement. We were like, wow, that could really resonate with a lot of people, and it should resonate with a lot of people. We just need to find a way of making a suspenseful film, because you tell people the premise and they go, oh yeah, that's like Harold and Kumar, is it? But for us, we have tried to tonally put it in the area, Dare We Dream, of Fargo, of a suburban pocket of masculinity, trying to, I guess, outsmart other people just on whims, with all thinking they're smarter than than everybody else in the room, all trying to outmaneuver one another, all in it for themselves. And, once Lee and I started writing, because we optioned Jamie's script, we paid him to do a draft, with our notes. We were like, we'd like to set it, instead of 2003, we'd like to set it in a time where there wasn't mobile phones, I'd like to set it at a time when the police had never, ever experienced a drug mule refusing to go to the toilet, so it wasn't contemplated in law. When was that, And we ended up, Jamie's great suggestion was, why don't we, I said, let's set it in 1982. I like 1982. That was the first year I got my first bus pass. And, but Jamie was like, what about 1983? That was when Australia sailed against America in the 1983 America's Cup yacht race. Mm. And it's a best of 7 match racing, and it takes place in Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island. And we found that this was the longest winning streak in the history of sport in the world. The New York Yacht Club, the Americans had held the cup for 132 years continuously. Wow. And in 1983, in the best of 7 races, the Americans were winning 1-0, 2-0, then 2-1, then 3-1. They needed to just win one more. And the Australians, unbeknownst to the Americans, had a hidden design on the keel of their boat. They were hiding the design of it. Even though they were losing, even though they were down by 2 races, they never ever revealed the design. So they'd travel the boat around and it had a skirt around it. What it ended up being, like, it was driving the Americans nuts. They would send scuba divers down there to have a look at it. What it ended up being was a winged keel, which helped with the drag and going upwind and what have you. But they had put wings on the keel instead of it just being vertical. They added these horizontal skirts. And sure enough, Australia came back and won the series 4-3. They won the last 3 races. And we thought this was a fantastic plot device for our story, that what if what we discussed before, like, instead of saying it's 200 words, we were like, what if the story takes place over the America's Cup period? So great, there's 15 days. You look at it, you read research thing. Right. What about the Australians and the Americans? What about the Americans are the police in our story? So whenever the Americans have a win, our police get closer to busting their man. And what, and it's not overt. You probably wouldn't even know that if I didn't sort of point that out. And it wasn't designed to be that way, but it was wonderfully liberating, writing and structuring the plot around having this, I guess, 7-point, structure of the plot, saying, right, well, the police are this close to getting their man, but the underdog in the end comes back, and does he triumph? Well, I guess people will have to see the film, but
well, let's talk about the actual writing process of this. So Jamie's done a couple passes at this, and then you and Lee decide you're going to take over the writing of it. What does that look like? Are you rewriting pages, giving them to Lee? He's giving you notes, swapping pages?
What ended up happening was Jamie wrote 2 drafts of 2 passes on a draft, and we would say, we'd like to have a character where, there's where there's a masculine friend who's coercing him into drugs, into the muling. I don't know that we need this character, blah, blah, blah. Jamie, to his credit, turned out 2 passes really quickly. And we were like, okay, well, we want to keep making some more changes. And Jamie's like, well, I've got to go and earn a living. I need to go and write. I've got other, writing gigs, and this is kind of like mates rates sort of thing. And so Lee and I ended up just sort of, our intention was not to rewrite it by any stretch of the imagination. It was just to tweak a sentence. And we're like, why don't we just go through line by line and just sentence by sentence and just see what happens, you know. And what ended up happening was, it was like you watch a movie and you stop in at a diner on the way home with your mate, and you're almost talking over the top of one another, deciphering and speculating on intentions and meanings and exciting parts of the film and underwhelming parts and that's sort of what ended up happening. Was there was a really, and if you speak to Lee about it, it was a very social experience. It was a very sociable one. You know, you chat to Lee and he's written over 10 or 11 or 12 feature films that are all deemed commercially successful, and some are blatantly commercially successful, or most. He says it was actually a really fun part, rather than being off in this sort of isolated by himself, you know, with the lights out, slogging away at the keyboard, giving the latest pass to somebody and then sort of just having kind of callous notes come back, impersonal notes come back to the writer. So, both he and I work as performers, as actors. So it was great to, I guess, put the scene on its feet. That was something that we certainly did in this film, was like, we acted it out for one another. We had someone it was almost like charades in some instances. And so you'd affect your voice, or you'd say, oh no, what about if he says this? What about if she walks in and she walks in and she's carrying a burnt shoe that she's found, and there's like 20 people, and it's almost like someone was, had a dictaphone, but it was almost a great way of filtering material from the outset. You didn't have to write a whole page or two or three and then look back at it and read and go, you know what, this is really trite. So yeah, it was great. You knew you wouldn't put it down on the page unless both of us were enjoying, the rich dialogue which we were wanting to write, all the twists and turns that we were trying to impress one another with, and for the most part, all the twists and turns in the Mule, they're Lee's. He's an incredibly knowledgeable film cinephile, and script writing is. I don't think I ever had a better lesson. For me, honestly, Ashley, I'd be spending 90 minutes writing an exchange with two what people would deem support characters or satellite characters. Casting agents might call them 50-worders. They might even just come in for a day, and I would sweat and labour. Now, I'm not Leonard Cohen. I'm just inexperienced, and I don't know how to not sweat the small stuff. Lee, on the other hand, was like, right, we need to kill somebody. We're 37 pages in, we have to kill somebody. Somebody has to go. We've got to get the audience, and he's, the confidence that he has in writing, the confidence that he has in understanding film structure, the confidence and owning, I guess, having more information about our script or about our world, about our characters than anyone else, gives you that permission to go, no, she wouldn't say that. No, she wouldn't do that. Absolutely not. He doesn't speak German. And that was the great thing that David Michaud, the director of Animal Kingdom, said once when asked about his experience and working with more, actors who have done many more films than he said, all you have to do is just research and know more about your script than anybody else. That's all you have to do, you know. And so I guess, yeah, for us, another thing we did actually was organise a read-through of the script before we'd finished writing. And we were like, you know what? Let's organise a read-through for the 6th of June. You're like, yeah, but that's like 8 days away. Yeah, and we were running up to page 52. Yeah, well, let's, you know, like what else is going to make us plough on with this? You know, it's not like we've got a boss who's coming in and saying. So, so curiously, on reflection, Lee and I went to 3 different places to write this film. One was at a place called Whale Beach in our friend's beach shack. Another one was a place in Malibu in California. And the third was at another beach house in an older beach house in St Andrews in Victoria in Australia. And we found on reflection that we'd written this film over, I guess, a total of 6 weeks all up, at 3 different beach places. We didn't go to the beach at any of the houses. We weren't swimming and surfing and you know getting prawns or yabbies from the sea. It was just I think it was a very cathartic experience, hearing the waves or hearing the water or just being in places that didn't have televisions, that you didn't sort of wake up and have a 4K 60-inch plasma there or whatever, and that was another thing that helped us, was actually sort of jumping ahead and saying giving ourselves a deadline, and which you can do all the time, but unless it involves others, you'll just go, yeah, I had to work at the laundromat this week. How am I meant to write? How am I meant to finish writing? So, and I guess finally, the last thing that I learned from Lee, well, one of the many, many, many things I learned from him was in his action and in his formatting of the script, he would intentionally format the script that to make you have to turn a page to find a reveal, for a reveal of a tense moment. He would actively, if he'd realise, if I just had 2 more lines, I'd be able to get this. She peered her head down the corridor. All of a sudden, hyphen. Yeah, he'd work out a way of formatting it so you had to turn the page to find out what happens on all of a sudden, coupled with, I guess, that Shane Black style of writing where, he's writing for the reader, where it'd be like, it's almost like that breaking the fourth wall. That you read sort of old Shane Black scripts and it says exterior, night exterior Los Angeles mansion. And then he'd say, this fuck off mansion is the type of mansion I'm going to buy when this film becomes a massive hit. And so whilst it does take you out of the I guess the mood and the place of the fictional place. Or fictional place, what it does do is, I guess, it gives you some brevity from having to focus the entire time, and you suddenly you're almost complicit in reading this, because one thing that's always amazed me, and I heard George Miller speak about this, Dr. George Miller, is how different films are at the end of their lives when Interstellar is released. And your film, Dish Dogs or whatever, but at one stage they looked exactly the same. They're all on this.
A very, very, those 2 films look the same at a very, very early stage.
I could have sworn you had a case to sue those guys. I thought they plagiarized that. was really obvious. But when I heard Dr. George speak about that, I was like, yeah, that's so true. That is so true. And why is that? Why not have storyboards in your script? Why not have? I've been in instances where I've received a script and it has a CD with music, and it tells you in the script, press track 11 now, and then you keep reading whilst track 11 plays. And
here's I think what you're getting at is an excellent point. I get a lot of questions from screenwriters. Hey, I've got this concept art. Hey, I've got this music. And the big hesitation I always have with telling people to do that is people don't realize, like, the people in Hollywood are like the best people. So if you're going to include concept art or music, it's got to be really good, or you're going to look like a real amateur. And that's always my fear with suggestions like what you just made. You're totally right. It can be creative and it can work great, but the what you're going to be compared to and what the readers of that material, what they're expecting is top flight stuff.
Yeah, well, I certainly wouldn't recommend doing that. As in, oh God, I've got to read a script and find a CD player and get out the Michael Bolton CD I've got in there and find a cover for Michael Bolton, But at the same time, George Miller's scripts, they're storyboards, or The Matrix, they storyboarded every shot. And both those films are very well resourced. Those filmmakers are very well resourced. But on the flip side of it is, why not? Why not? Why? It's a question for the individual. Why do all films look the same at script stage, or most films rather than all? And there are varying theories on that, but fundamentally, that what chatting with Lee today, what seems to be happening more and more now is that people say, you know what, I wrote this film for Bill Murray, I wrote this for Jeff Bridges, rather than, well, I think you could have Robert Patrick in this role, and maybe, possibly Tom Cruise. It just depends. And what seems to happen is that people are seeking these actors out and going to them and go, listen, I wrote this for you, Kevin Spacey. You send it to Kevin Spacey, and I guess that's another way of providing some structure to yourself and brief to yourself, and almost a voice, dare I say, that the challenge there is then, are you just doing something derivative, or your take on what Kevin Spacey would say if he was a sheriff in the Wild West. Mm-hmm. So I don't think, as your listeners and you are well aware, I don't think there's any. There's nothing that's tried and true, other than embracing those obstacles, embracing those rejections, embracing the fact that your script is too long, or that you can only raise $400 to make your films, and that is the people who are able to navigate those obstacles with wit and stamina, they're the ones who will get hired. Ultimately, I feel they're the ones who you go, you know what, you only have to be two of three things. I've heard this in a few spots where it's like, you only have to deliver your work, do two of three things. One, deliver your work on time. Two, be nice to work with, and three, deliver good work, regardless of when you deliver it. And you only have to do two of those things. You can be nice to work with, and you deliver your work on time. Let's keep Angus around. Yeah, or you could deliver great work and be nice to work with. That would be ideal, and have it on top. But you only ever have to do two of the three, and so again, that then comes back to the question: yeah, but what's good work? What's great work? And that is the joy of art, I guess, or the joy of what we do, is that if someone doesn't like it, then invariably someone else will. They have to.
Let's talk a bit about just the business side of the Mule. How did it just kind of come together in terms of, okay, so now you have a script, what was the next step? Raising the money, putting the production together. Maybe you can tell us just sort of how the actual production, once you had a script you liked, how you actually got all this together and got to shooting.
Well, we in Australia are very fortunate enough to have a federal film funding agency and state-based ones. And for us, we went and saw our old television producer employers, Bruce Kane and Paul Clark, and said, "Oh, do you think you could help us, navigate this kind of seemingly bureaucratic process to, get some money for the film?" And they did. But we quickly found out that you had to have all these other things in place, like a letter of commitment from a sales agent, a letter of commitment from a local distributor, and you quickly realise that all of this is coming down to the script. All of this is coming down to your screenplay. Even when they say, "Who have you got attached?" and you're like, "Well, we're talking to James Cromwell. We think he's shown a bit of interest, we'd love."
Now, you don't think having Lee as a writer and obviously also a producer, I mean, he's got such a track record with some of these big movies, that doesn't help, certainly getting some of these things, but that doesn't help a great deal? You think that getting the actors was...
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. But at the same time, you have to have... It's taxpayer money. So they have to... There's a massive transparency around it. And I guess if you just say, "Oh, well..." I mean, someone like Lee, obviously, incredible track record. Yes, it makes the decision easier or justifiable for some, I would imagine. But, fundamentally, there needs to be, if they just approved a script and then it came out, well, the audience and the taxpayers of Australia, by rightly, would, be able to say, "This is crap. Who paid for this? My money paid for this." So there's pressure on both sides of the coin, but... we're very privileged to be able to have that in Australia. You're not required to pay that money back. You're not.
Wow.
You're not. As long as you're promoting Australia, you reach a certain amount of qualifying expenditure, which promoting and featuring Australian content. Well, you don't actually have to pay that money back, and that doesn't happen anywhere in the commercial world, unless you maybe, privy to, or in cahoots with the Bill Gates Foundation. But, it's huge for Australian filmmakers to have that support.
Yeah. So tell me, too, about the South by Southwest. I'm always curious, just as a filmmaker myself, how you got into South by Southwest. Was it a producer's rep? Was there, you knew someone, or you sent the film in blind and they just liked it, so they took it? How did that go down?
Well, our sales agent, E1, are the largest sales agent in the world. And you would think that they could just sort of get you into any film festival, kind of like, "Oh, it's all right. I know the person on the door." "Yeah, but I'm wearing sand shoes." "No, yeah, it's fine. I don't have a tie." "Listen, I can get you in." But the reality is, that doesn't happen. And the more the filmmaking, is more accessible by more and more people every month now. And so, dare I say, the competition to get into these festivals are tighter and tighter and harder and harder each year. So, you apply. Yes, you can say, yes, a benefit that comes from having a sales agent is they can write to, Pete Edwards at the Nevada State Film Festival and say, hey, Pete, keep an eye out for one of our titles. It's called Ninja Apocalypse, and so they go, cool, we'll do. And of course that's what happens. Of course that's what happens at Sundance. It's not like you've got these interns watching every film and they go, and it's like Charlie Bucket from Willy Wonka, and they run through the Mormon state and go, I found it. I found Blue Ruin, everybody, it's here. That doesn't happen. There are people, they go to these festivals every year. Agents named Chad go up there on their Blackberries and, make an appearance for 2 days, don't look up from their trail, from their Blackberries, and then go back to LA. So it is a fairly closed shop, but there are also all these incredible, I guess, mentoring programs, and certainly like places like Sundance and wherever your listeners listen, it's a decision for the screenwriters to make, because invariably what ends up happening is they want access to your screenplay. They want you to submit your screenplay blindly to some people you don't know, and go, yeah, submit your screenplay, and we'll, you too could qualify for our Washington, capital fund of $10,000 to finish off a pass. But then all these caveats that you have to have it broadcast there, or, it has to premiere there, all those things. So I guess Lee and I were very reluctant to submit our screenplay randomly into a competition per se. We wanted to get it to a point where we thought, you know what, this is, we'd be comfortable sharing this now. And we would like to get some feedback from certain people, and we identified certain people that we sought their feedback on, and what quickly becomes apparent is when some notes become a chorus, where three people say, "Yeah, it's a shame that it turns out the dragon was just a dream." And you go, right, okay, that we should look at that. The first instinct's always a bit of defensiveness. No, what are you talking about? But when one note becomes two, then it's certainly worth your attention beyond just sort of chewing it over and coming up with an answer. So for in regards to actually getting your screenplay into these screenplay competitions, Blacklist is great. Personally, it's a very legitimate way of having your film read by lots of people, and giving it the best chance. If you don't live in Los Angeles and you don't, have a connection to Gersh or Paradigm or CAA, it's a great way to look at how people are positioning the film, what their one paragraph synopsis is, or what their short synopsis is. And fundamentally, the more you read or the more you listen to music, the more films you watch, the more boxing training you do, the better the boxer you become. And so, yeah, it really is a matter of last woman or last man standing.
So let's talk about how people can see the Mule. Maybe you can talk about some release dates for it, as well as you had mentioned in the pre-interview about a Twitter event that's coming up for it. Just kind of tell us about that stuff.
Well, the Mule's being released simultaneously in Australia, America, Canada, and New Zealand on November 21st, digitally, elevated digital, and day and date in America. For us as an independent film, we need to give the audience the best chance to access the film, and with limited print and advertising spend, limited marketing spend, limited support around promoting the film, well, you're only going to get a limited audience. And if you show the film theatrically for a cinematic season, well, then there are caveats that come with it that they're called release windows, theatrical release windows. And in America, it's sitting around 105 days. In Australia, it's 120 days where you agree to not release it on other platforms. Day and date, obviously in America, they have the audience to sustain that. In Australia, we don't. And so we've chosen to bypass a traditional cinematic release, even though our contract with E1 says that we're obliged to. We spoke to all our partners and thought, you know what, rather than put it on in a few cinemas and have people say, oh, you know, it didn't get the same figures as Guardians of the Galaxy, it must be a terrible film. For us, it's like, well, let's try to protect our brand a little more. Let's rather than just say, yeah, we're the tiny film that opened on 2 cinemas. It's like, no, we're actually going to the bridesmaids first. We're going to the bridesmaids and say, what is it that you can? We'll come to you first and for what you want to. Yeah, we'll partner up. You want to release do you think you could release the film in 4 countries? That's a news story, or maybe a curious angle at least. And so we've been trying to do that with our audience the entire way. We're having a live viewing of the Mule on the 6th of December Pacific time at 9 p.m. and it'll be midnight that night, so 7 a.m. in New York, and we want everybody to watch press play at the same time, watch this film. We'll have the cast, we'll have the filmmakers, we'll have friends profiled and non-profiled, all watching the film. The Mule movie is our Twitter handle at the Mule movie, and it'll be like watching a special features, I guess, on a Blu-ray, but you'll be able to communicate with Lee, myself, and the cast, and our various sort of department heads and what have you. So yeah, there's so much for people to choose from now. Yeah. For us, we actually want to try to engage an audience and do it on a level, on Twitter where you can actually have direct access to those folk.
Perfect. I will link to all that in the show notes, so people can find that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious too. Maybe you can just mention your personal Twitter handle. How can people just keep up with you personally about what you're doing and what you're working on?
Yeah, that's just my name. So that's at Angus Sampson.
Okay,
ANGUSSAMPSON. And Lee's is at L Winnell, LWHANNELL. So and so for us, I guess it's I'm a bit more intermittent on Twitter, although as of late I've been all these varying productions I'm involved in pushing me to write more, and so it is. It's a fantastic way to access a lot of people very quickly. Well, I've never had Facebook, but what I read of it nowadays is that they actually make it hard for you to connect with those people that you used to have common links with. Now they go, all right, you're into films, right? Well, we'll separate the film people, and in exchange for that, we'll actually say, oh, you want to connect with the film people? Well, it's $6.30 a day or whatever, and so It doesn't seem to be that. It doesn't seem to be that subterfuge, dare I say that, on Twitter, where it's just like, hey man, I I want to follow Ashley. Yeah, I'll just follow him, and then there's that. I don't know. It's not difficult for me to. I can just type your name in and it's there, or I can write to you. It seems to be a lot more film friendly, dare I say, and fan friendly.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see how that shakes out over the next couple of years, but I totally agree. Well, Angus, you've been very generous with your time. This has been a great interview.
Thank you for supporting.
Very amusing and lots of great tips. So I really do appreciate it.
No, thank you so much, man, and please keep up great work, and shoot me a message on Skype when and if it makes it up. I'll definitely pass it on to Lee, and we'll give you some. We'll write you some messages afterwards, of course.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashley.
I'm going to be running another online class called How to Write a Killer First Act for Your Screenplay. I'm going to be doing a deep dive into two great screenplays, Unforgiven and Jerry Maguire. These are both great scripts with great first acts, and there's a lot of lessons I'll be pulling out of them. This is the fourth class in this series, which is going to guide you through the entire screenwriting process from concept to outlining to writing to marketing. If you missed the first three classes, no problem. I recorded them and I put them in the SYS Select forum for you to listen to at your leisure. The class is going to be on Saturday, December 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. If you'd like to learn more about this class, go to www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/classes. Also, if you're listening to this after the class has taken place, that's not a problem. I will record this class too and put it in the SYS Select forum. In fact, all the classes that I have been teaching through this program are recorded and are in the forum for SYS Select members to listen to. There's more than a dozen classes in there now, so to learn more about this, just go to www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Corey Mandel. Corey is a screenwriter and a screenwriting teacher. He's got a very unique approach to writing and really offers up some great insight to all writers. We have a great conversation that covers quite a bit of ground. I learned a lot from talking with him, and I'm still mulling over a lot of what we discussed. There's a lot of great information in the interview for screenwriters at all levels, so keep an eye out for that interview next week. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Angus. I thought it was really interesting how he was able to turn his acting gig into a writing gig. Obviously, most people listening to this podcast aren't actors and won't have that specific opportunity, but to me, it's really about seizing the opportunities that you do have, which is exactly what he did. He showed initiative, he saw some opportunities, and he took those opportunities. There's a lot of different types of production jobs, from lawyers to accountants to assistants. So no matter what you do, you need to put yourself into a place where you might find these sorts of opportunities, and then you need to make the most out of them. On the flip side, you might very well be working at a company that has some sort of screenwriting needs. No matter what job you currently have, maybe you could write a script for an advertisement for the company, and maybe you could even go out and shoot that ad and put it on YouTube. You just don't know where things are going to lead. Even doing something as small as that is still a professional credit that you can show people. Come up with an interesting, creative ad, a funny ad, and that's something you can use on in your query letter. It's something you can put on your resume as a professional credit. And it just shows initiative. It's going to show initiative to your boss. You just don't know where things are going to lead. Maybe he ends up hiring you to do more commercials if you just do one for free and it actually is funny and is actually good. I also think it should be noted that Angus spent time going to school to be a copywriter. Any sort of job that's writing, especially something in advertising where you're really trying to use words to get people to understand your message, this is great training, a great training ground for screenwriters. So again, as you're sort of preparing your career, you're getting out of college, see if you can't find a job that gets you in a position where you're using words and writing words every day. This will be just a great sort of a base for you once you become a professional screenwriter. And maybe just take a step back for a minute, and maybe there's some realistic things that you could be doing right now that could make yourself better as a writer, help you prepare yourself for a professional career. Maybe there's writing opportunities in your current company. Maybe there's copywriting opportunities in your current company that you could find. And if you show some initiative, you express some interest, maybe your boss would let you do these things. Anyways, that's the show. Thank you for listening.